Now that we calculated all the addresses for the VPCs and the subnets, it's time to launch them. If you did not write down all of the addresses, don't worry, because I'm going to put all of these addresses in the description of this video so you can refer to it. In the AWS console, make sure that you are in Central, so Canada Central. We're going to start with Canada first, so we're going to launch 4 VPCs in Canada, UK, more specifically London, Brazil, and Australia. Let's start by going to the VPC console, click on VPCs, and then create VPC. For the name tag, I'm going to call Global Services, since that's the name of my environment in Canada. Now the address is going to be 10.112.00/23. You can select no IPv6 CIDR block, and then for tenancy, just leave default. After you create it, we just need to modify one attribute of the VPC. So click on the VPC, and you notice down here that DNS hostnames is disabled. So we need to enable this, and you understand why later. So click on Actions, edit DNS hostnames, click on Enable, and save it. Now let's create all the subnets. So click on Create Subnet. Name tag is gonna be, I'm gonna call private A, which means it's a private subnet in the A availability zone. The VPC is gonna be Global Services. The availability zone is gonna be Central 1A. And the CIDR block is 10.112.00/25. Let's do the same for private B. Now you're basically gonna have to do this for 3 other regions. Let me show you here. So we're in Canada, and you're gonna do the same for London, for South America, São Paulo, and finally for Asia Pacific, Sydney. And again, if you don't remember the addresses of all of the VPCs, please refer to the description of this video. I'm not gonna show you one by one because the creation is pretty much the same in any region, so I'm just gonna fast forward. When you're done, go back to the Canada Central region. Next step is going to be to launch Ec2 instances in each one of the VPCs so we can perform a little test later. So head over to the Ec2 console. So click here, Ec2. Then down here where it says launch instance, so click launch instance. For the image, you can select an Amazon Linux 2. We're just going to be performing ping, so I don't need anything crazily large. I'm going to go with a T3 Nano. Now we're going to select our VPC. The subnet, it doesn't matter if it's private A or B. For the auto-assigned public IP address, we don't want any public IP address to our instance. But here it says it's disabled, so it's not going to get it anyway. So that's fine. The rest should be okay. So click on add storage. 8 GB is fine. For the tag, I'm just gonna add a name so I can identify later. So CA ping. For the security group, we need a new one, so I'm gonna call it ping. and ping. Now, you might think that we need SSH to get into those instances, but we actually don't need, because we're going to be using a service called Session Manager. So remove the SSH rule. Now add another one. Because we're going to be doing ping, we need to enable ICMP here. So ICMP needs to be whitelisted. So all ICMP, all port range. Now the source, I'm just going to put the global range, which was 10.1.12.0.0/12, which means that only instances within this range will be able to ping this one. Click on review, launch. Now, since you don't need SSH, that means you also don't need a key pair. So you can click on choose and then proceed without. Click on this little checkbox here and launch the instance. Same way as the VPC, we're going to have to launch 3 instances more in UK, London, South America, and Australia. The process to launch the instance is exactly the same. The instance is going to be exactly the same. All the security group rules, all of the configuration. So again, I'm just going to fast forward. Remember that I mentioned that we're not going to be using SSH? Let me show you how we're going to do it. Go back to the VPC console. Click on Endpoints. Now, if you never worked with endpoints before, let me quickly explain what it is. So imagine that you have an API running on an Ec2 instance in this VPC here, and this API needs to access S3. The domain for an S3 bucket, it's actually public, which means that if you try to run any operations in this bucket, the request is going to go through the internet. But in our case, we do not have access to the internet, so there's no way for us to reach to S3 through the internet. So what we can do is to create an endpoint, because then all the requests that would go through the internet, it's actually going to go through Amazon's network, and it's a private connection. Basically, if you want to make an API call to an AWS service, but you don't want to go through the internet, then you can create an endpoint for it. And what we need here is 2 endpoints. Let's create the first one. Let's start by typing in the service name, so which is SSM. And you see that there are two endpoints here, SSM and SSM messages. So we're going to create these 2 endpoints. Let's start with SSM. So click on SSM, select your VPC. The subnets are going to be selected already, so that's fine. Make sure that enable DNS name is selected, and I'll explain later why you need this. Now down here you see security group, and we only have 2, the default and ping. You see that this endpoint is type interface, which means that AWS is going to allocate an ENI for this endpoint, so an elastic network interface, which is an IP address. And whenever you have an ENI to an endpoint, that means you need a security group that allows traffic to this ENI. The 2 that we have is default and ping, and none of them it's actually allowing the traffic to go to the endpoint, because we need a rule which allows HTTPS traffic. So what we're going to do is to create a new security group. So click on create new security group. It's going to take you to the security group interface. Click on here, create security group, and then give it a name. Let's say VPC Endpoints. Description, I'm going to make it the same. The VPC is going to be global services, and then for the inbound rule, so add rule, and again, this needs to be HTTPS, so 443, and then the traffic is going to come from anywhere from the network, so that's why I'm going to specify 10.112.00/12, which is the global range. Outbounds, you can just leave as is, and create security group. Now go back to the endpoint. Click on VPC Endpoints. And that's it. Click on Create Endpoint. Now let's do the same for the second one. So SSM, now it's SSM messages, global services, enabled, and VPC endpoints. Create endpoint. While we wait for this to become available, let me explain why we had to enable DNS name. So here down the bottom, you have DNS names, and this is the DNS name for your endpoint. So you see that the domain is ssm.cacentral.vpce.amazonaws.com. If we're using, let's say, the CLI or the SDK, the CLI, the SDK, they would expect this address to be ssm.cacentral.amazonaws.com because that's the public domain for the API. But because you have VPCE here, they wouldn't be able to communicate with this API. And the reason why it wouldn't be able to communicate is because the CLI and the SDK would use ssm.cacentral.amazonaws.com, which is a public domain, and that means that the traffic would go through the internet. But your VPC doesn't have access to the internet, so that's why the CLI and the SDK wouldn't be able to make API calls to this service. What needs to happen here is that ssm.cacentral.amazonaws.com needs to be a private domain instead. Down at the bottom, there is something called private DNS name, and you see that this is exactly the same as the public domain. And so what AWS did for you is behind the scenes, they created a private hosted zone and associated this private hosted zone with your VPC. And the domain of this private hosted zone is exactly this. Now, whenever you use the CLI or the SDK and you want to make API calls to SSM, you're actually going to be using the private domain, not the public. Remember also when you had to enable DNS hostname on your VPC, that's exactly why you did that. Because if you did not do that, you wouldn't be able to associate this VPC with a private hosted zone. I hope this is clear why we enable DNS name. If it's not, then just leave a comment below and I can explain further. Let's see if our endpoints are available. Okay, they are available now. This was the first thing that we needed to do, which is to create the endpoints. The second one is, because this is the service, our EC2 instance needs to be given permission to call this service, which means that we need to create an IAM role for it. So click on Services, IAM, go to Roles, create role, select EC2. Now for the permission, type in Amazon EC2 role for, and you're gonna see here at the bottom, EC2 role for SSM. So if you want to be able to log into your instances using SSM, this is the policy that needs to be in the role that is assigned to the instance. So click on this policy, review, and I'm just gonna call VPC Endpoints, create role. Now let's go back to EC2 and assign this role to our instance. EC2 running instances, so click on, this one. And then instance settings, attach, replace IAM role. And it's right here, VPC endpoints, make sure it's selected, apply. And down here at the bottom of the configuration, you're gonna see IAM role is VPC endpoints. So this means that our instance now has permission to call the SSM service. Finally, let's see if we can actually log into this instance. So click on service, type in system. So click on systems manager. Then here on the left you have session manager. So click on session manager, start session, and it should be able to see your instance here. But because we just attached the role, it's gonna take a few minutes. Okay, I can finally see the instance now. I have to say, for me, it took a while for this to show up. So it might take a while for you as well. If you want to speed up the process, I'm not sure if it would speed up, but I just figured that I could stop and start the instance. So try to do that, and maybe you see straight away your instance here. But now that we see our instance, so just click on it and start session. And that's gonna give you access to a terminal that you can just write commands. So what we're gonna be doing later is to write ping commands to try to ping other instances. Perfect, so that is in place. And everything we did here is for the Canada region. So what you're gonna have to do now is for each one of the other regions. So for London, South America, and Australia as well. I'm not going to show the whole process setting up all this in all the regions because the process is exactly the same. So I just leave you to it, and I'll see you in the next video to set up the transit gateway.